Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode of Business Integrity Innovations. And you're in for a treat today because Michelle and I are in for a treat. We have Dr. Maximilian Burger-Scheidlin, who is with ICC Austria. Dr. Scheidlin, Burger, or Max, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Happy to have me.
Could you tell us a little bit about your professional background and your current role?
I'm a trained lawyer, gone astray. My first job has been selling machinery in Africa, specifically Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti, and so on. And at that time, you see, I have gray hair at that time. Corruption payments have been still tax deductible. And in the first moves, I indulged and I've been corrupt myself, until I got across a Sudanese businessman who imported brick and tile machinery from Austria, who went around the market and said, "I never bribe." And I thought he was cuckoo. How can he make possibly business in this very corrupt market without bribing? Then I realized he maximized profits. He made more profits than his competition. And then I watched him and I realized that the average corruption margin at that time was in 20% of the value of the goods. And he took half of it into his own pocket, so he had more profits than the competition. The other 10% he invested in a fantastic after-sale service, gave out for Africa at that time, unusual, a kind of 24-hour service guarantee for his machinery, and employed the best after-sales service engineers, had every possible spare part in his yard, and really could fulfill his promises. And what did the competition do? The competition, when something went wrong, often did not have the right spare part, so they asked for a pro forma invoice from Austria, Germany. Then they went to have an import license, and after that, a hard currency transfer license. After that, they flew in the spare part by aircraft, possibly bribed customs to get things out. Anyway, at the end of the day, machinery of the non-corrupt was down for repairs and maintenance, something like 1 week to 10 days a year. And the ones of the corrupt people, something like 2 to 3 months a year. And that's why even the most corrupt people at the time realized, if my machinery is not working, no profit. And that's why that guy was successful. And for me, that has been the wake-up call.
That is a fabulous story. Michelle, I'm going to pitch it over to you to visit with Max about ICC Austria and their fight against corruption.
Great. And I'm so looking forward to hearing a little bit more because I think you've already started to dig into sort of the commercial approach to anti-corruption, and we're going to get into that more. And I know books will love it. But before we go there, maybe tell our listeners a little bit about what ICC Austria is and what you do there and what your role is.
ICC Austria is an NGO, a business NGO, established for 100 years with the key goal of sustainable business, yes, profit maximization, however, over the very, very long run. We hate next quarterly profits. So yes, we're in for profit maximization over 10, 50 years, but not for tomorrow. And with this, ICC is in dispute avoidance, dispute settlement and arbitration. We are do rules for importers, exporters, and ICC has a big office in London, ICC Commercial Crime Services, which fight ship hijacking and investment fraud, product counterfeiting, and God knows what. And I have on my desk something like $2 to $3 billion of fraud cases, corruption cases, etc., on my desk, trying not so much the police approach when something has happened, what to do. However, before something has happened, how to avoid it, how to tell companies, please do not sign this contract, etc.
$2 to $3 billion. That's quite a bit. And it means you're having quite an impact in the work that you do. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of some of the tools that you have that help you to sort of achieve the goals that you have at ICC Austria? Just so folks can get a little bit more of an understanding.
We have to distinguish here commercial fraud, for example, import-export fraud, bank guarantee fraud, letter of credit fraud, and other devices. What we have our international network, and we realize very quickly if, let's say, bill of lading is forged, if a certificate of origin is forged, and we can rely on partners throughout the world to verify information quite quickly. This includes countries like Nigeria, Brazil, and others, not only the Western European countries. And in ship hijacking and ship fraud of the various sense, we have a special office in Malaysia, tracking ships and helping when even the slightest attack do occur or something seems very fishy. On the corruption side, I have been trying to do the legal and compliance approach to anti-corruption for the last 15, 20 years, which works wonderfully in, let's say, the OECD countries, Western Europe, North America. But if I go to the Nigerias, plural, of the world, they rather tell me, get lost, if I come with pure legal and compliance.
I'm gonna turn it over to Tom a little bit because I think we're getting right into sort of this commercial approach versus the legal approach to compliance. We want to dig into that because I think it's a great approach. Tom, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. Max, I grew up professionally in the city of Houston, Texas, in the energy industry. And the energy industry had a lot of corruption cases, particularly in the first 15 years of this century. And what I saw in my industry was a business response to that legal enforcement, series of legal enforcement actions. Energy world, there are the producing companies, the Shells, the Chevrons who have the oil, or at least have leased it. Then there are companies under that that do the work to bring the oil out of the ground. And then there's the companies that do all the work for those service companies. And my observation was that if you wanted to do work anywhere in that supply chain or value chain, you had to have a compliance program, literally down to, because I did the legal work for this company, a $15 million software company was too small to have their own salesman. They had one piece of software that did something. And I told them, if you don't have a compliance program in place, you're not going to get a contract. And literally 2 weeks later, one of the big boys came along, and the second thing they asked for is, we want to see your compliance program. And so that's my experience, and I'm a huge believer in that commercial approach. But you've got to experience that from your own perspective. So could you tell us, maybe start with what you see as the legal approach, and then we can contrast what we both see as the commercial approach, really that went back to your opening story.
If I approach an American businessman or a German one, and I tell him the law demands you must, otherwise you go to prison, the answer is probably, yes, sir, we respect the law. If you tell the same line to somebody in Uzbekistan, in Pakistan, in Nigeria, they might tell you, get lost. They don't take it seriously. I mean, they might, because they want to go into a business with Shell. They might say, we do it formally. Yes, we on paper respect it. However, in their hearts and minds, they don't take it seriously, at least not for their own country. It's different in the OECD countries. And I had something like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, a long discussion with the chief compliance officer of a worldwide active engineering company based in Hong Kong. And that guy has been responsible for legal and compliance in China, the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam. And I asked him, I know you have one of the best compliance programs in the world. How things are going in practice? And he told me kind of excerpts from his compliance program. And I told him, I know that, but what is the practice? What's down at the bottom? And after 3 hours, he told me, like in the past. So formally on the outside, they had a wonderful program. I mean, one of the finest things I've seen in the world. But underneath the cover, not much has changed. So if a judge would have looked at his compliance program, every piece you wanted to have has been there and in place and observed and rechecked every year or 2 years or 3 years. But underneath that, a totally different world. And what I'm trying to do with what I call the commercial approach, and there the key line is not the law of demand, but I want to go into mindset changes. My key line is increase profit, reduce risks by avoiding and not indulging in corruption. So I'm trying to boost the long-term ego of perhaps presently corrupt individuals. I mean, in Sudan, in Nigeria, in Pakistan, most business people simply have been socialized with corruption. They see nothing wrong. It's the standard way to feed the family to success. So if a Westerner comes and says, legal and compliant, you must, they think I signed this paper. But in practice, nothing going. Why should I change? What most corrupt people in these countries don't realize that yes, any type of fraud, any type of corruption or whatever you have it, bad deed, is profitable, yes, in the short run, 1 month, 1 year. But in the longer run, I mean, if I look at Michele and I would tell her if we are in the seminar, you have another 50 years to live. Maximize your profit over your lifetime with 2 conditions, which are egoistic for you. Never sit in prison and never have your account confiscated. The money, long term, keeping illegal gains long term is quite difficult because with every fraud, with every corrupt deed, there are people in the know. It might be a colleague, it might be a secretary, it might be a banker, it might be a spouse who has lived in luxury for a few years, and if I divorce her or him, what happens? So the dangers loom not in the form of the public prosecutor. The dangers loom in the vicinity of the fraudster, of the corrupt person, corrupt individual. And if I'm in Uzbekistan and I earn much more than my legal salary, the local banker will know. So I will try to transfer my money somewhere outside. I will not keep everything in Uzbekistan. I might try to give it to Qatar, to Dubai. But in Dubai, international money laundering law applies. And again, there might be bankers who say, this is not totally safe and secure. Might be let's increase the fees or let's demand a little protection money. So the problem of fraudsters, of corrupt individuals is how to spend the money. If I do it at home and I give big parties, my relationship with nephews and nieces will grow dramatically. Even fifth cousin will come and join the family. How much do I have for myself? There's an average guesstimate that a corrupt person can keep something like 30% of his income. And 70% he has to redistribute to friends of heart and pocket. But if there's a regime change, he'll be responsible for 100% of the proceeds. So there are risks. So what I'm trying to do is I try with a commercial approach to anti-corruption. I try to boost the long-term egoism of people. And now let's go to let's say, a macro example and a micro example. Let's move to Turkey. You know, the big earthquake in March last year, 50,000 people dead. Now, most houses which collapsed have been built after the year 1990 to 2000. So it were rather modern buildings, not the old ones. The laws in Turkey were quite relatively appropriate. However, the corrupt people didn't put enough cement, enough steel reinforcement, etc., into the buildings. They looked wonderful. I mean, if you've seen the pictures, 5, 10-story buildings with wonderful balconies, fantastic. On the inside, shaky. Now, if you go to the pure legal and compliance approach, you would ask, who were the fraudsters and how much money did they make and rip off. Perhaps 100 million, $150 million. We don't know. Now, if you go to the commercial approach to anti-corruption, it goes much further. Beside the human tragedy of 50,000 people dead, there are 50,000 people who do not consume and work anymore. If you go to the US Nobel laureate for economics, Joseph Stiglitz, he did a work on the true cost of the Iraq War. And his estimates are that a soldier killed in Iraq, what would he do in America? He might be a worker at General Motors, Ford, etc. And what would be his value added to the economy over his lifetime? And Stiglitz estimated that the value contributed to the economy would be something like, at that time, $13 to $15 million over his lifetime per person. Now, look at the figures. In Turkey, you might have value added something like 70, minus 80% per person. So we still talk about $3-4 million per person multiplied by 50,000. And we're suddenly in the vicinity of something like 150 billion loss for the economy. That's on the macro side. Let's go to an example on the micro side. I've changed a factory in China, a company with something like 130, 150 employees, making hydraulic tubes for fire brigade ladders. So the ladders which really are pushed out for the fire brigades, and then in case of a fire, applied. Now, the owner told me, I have a problem. The problem is that my ladders slowly sink down, slowly. And I said, I'm not an engineer, but I guess you have corruption in the company. Probably your purchasing manager does not buy exactly the right high quality steel, and that's why you have the problem. The owner agreed and said, what do we do? Do we kick out the purchasing manager? I said, please, if the manager is good technically, don't kick him out, because you do not know if your successor will be clean. Let's do it differently. So we analyzed the company and realized that something like 1/3 of all employees have been somehow engaged in repair in the widest sense, meaning from incoming complaint about all kind of malfunctions to perhaps little bribe payments to quieten people down to actual technical repairs, etc. So 1/3 of the company was somehow repairs in the widest sense. So I told the owner, let's take this money and put it into a profit sharing agreement with the workers. The next question I asked, how much time passes between purchasing of raw materials and bits and pieces to sales of your ladders? And he told me 6 to 9 months. So I told him, let's make a profit sharing agreement to be paid out after 18 months on condition of excellent quality and no corruption. He agreed. So in effect, we could double the salaries of everybody, from the corrupt purchasing manager to down to the last secretary. So everybody really was eager to have an eye on the colleague, that they work very good, very diligent, and very proper. So at the end of the year, we could double the salaries, quality increased dramatically. And after a year, a lot of people, a lot of fire brigades in the vicinity realized that suddenly this company could produce at a cheaper price, because it didn't pay bribes anymore, a higher quality. So many other municipalities came in and said, wanted these fire brigades. So the owner made a tremendous profit in addition. Everybody did win. And this was white money, not fraudulent money, which you have to hide somewhere, but fully proper money, which you could spend and see and show to everybody. So a win for everybody.
So, could I ask you to maybe expand simply, or you gave us a micro and macro view, but what would be your views on anti corruption as a key to the expansion of the global economy?
Negotiations on bribes take time, and time is money. So wherever you have long negotiations, it's a loss for everybody. The bribe taker, the bribe giver, and everybody around it. Point two, as corruption usually breeds lower or bad quality, repairs go up, things don't work properly, things are at a standstill, etc., etc. So I think business without corruption moves much faster, and that would increase the economy and it would increase business and profits for everybody, from the low worker to the owners. Everybody can win. And if you go into the political scene, for example, if you look at, for example, the civil war in Syria, if you look at Boko Haram, if you look at, I don't know, the war in Ukraine, everywhere corruption is an added root cause. So if you would kind of eliminate corruption, hopes would go up, the little guys would feel much more positive and more in power, and civil wars, civil disturbance, and what then you can call a savior will come up when everybody's hopeless. I mean, you had it in Germany with Hitler, you had it in Syria with the Islamic State. Uh, Civil wars, civil disturbances would strongly be reduced.
Michelle, I'm going to pitch it over to you for a question or two.
I think something that you've really sort of helped us to get a sense of is this personal sort of motivation, how we can change the mindset. That's something that I think really aligns well with what we're trying to do with ethics first, right? We're trying to get a group of people together, change their mindsets, reduce risk, right? Increase profit overall. But I wonder if others listening to what we're discussing here might say, I think legal compliance is better than this commercial idea, or vice versa. Can you maybe give us some of your insight into sort of what are some of the good takeaways from both areas that can really help to? I mean, maybe they have synergies and they work well with each other.
I think we need both. We have tried legal and compliance and the corruption for the last 20 years. And in the OECD countries, it has worked wonders, dramatic changes. If you take the multinational corporations based with their headquarter in OECD countries, working in the Nigerias of this world, yes, they have reduced corruption considerably within their fief. But that does not mean that on the ground in higher risk countries, much has changed. It starts in Serbia from the Austrian point of view, it goes to Bangladesh, it goes to God knows where. Local business still engage in corruption as in the past. So legal and compliance, yes, wonderful. You need it as a backup. It's like antibiotic. But if you have a kind of a little splinter in your finger, you can take as much antibiotics as you want. If you don't take out the splinter, there will still be an inflammation. So you need both, in my opinion. And yes, you can work only with legal and compliance approach in OECD countries. But if you really want to target the rest of the world, if you look at the Corruption Perception Index list of 50 plus, I think in addition, you absolutely need the commercial approach, in addition to really get people not only with a negative, you must, threatening approach, but a positive hope so that they themselves see that they can profit from non-corruption. And only if you have a mindset change, eventually it will really change and have a result. With threats alone, you will not go very far. You need both.
Max, as we move towards the end of this episode, I wanted to ask you to maybe look down the road to 2030, or as I like to say, mid century. And where do you see the fight against corruption as we move towards 2030 and beyond?
I did a presentation at a business conference last year in Geneva with attendees from something like 120 countries. And after my presentation on the commercial approach of anti-corruption, the vice chair of the Nigerian Business Association came running and said, "We've tried anti-corruption for the last 20 years. Nothing works. But yes, the commercial approach might make a difference." I think presently hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on anti-corruption training around the world every year on the legal and compliance approach. We need, in addition, in the higher risk countries, we need, in addition, to introduce the commercial approach to really give hope and a future, a positive future to people and not threat. Threats alone will not change the landscape. We need both as a backup, the legal and compliance, but as a move forward on top, mindset changes, creating hope for the future, a better life for businessmen and for little guys, for everybody. Everybody can win if we truly reduce corruption.
Wow. I can't think of a better way to end this podcast, but I do want to ask you if our listeners wanted more information on ICC Austria and the approaches that you have articulated and advocated, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
Start with our webpage, icc@iccaustria.org. That's our email address. I'm doing presentations throughout the world. The next one coming up is in Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia. The next one in Turkey, and then in Indonesia. I've done presentations in India and Brazil. So I'm happy to come your way, wherever it is in the world. And I think everybody's happy to just join in, just ask me, just give me an email, or just approach me somehow. We are happy to help. In individual cases, it might be a company going from an OECD country to, I don't know, Burundi, and ask how to change things. But especially, I think the value added is with companies in the difficult countries, how to really approach a better life for themselves and for their environment. And yes, an individual company can go it alone. They do not have to wait that the government changes or a public prosecutor steps in. And I had a case in Tajikistan. I made a presentation in Kazakhstan, and the Tajik was there. And 6 months later, he approached me and said, 2 weeks after the seminar, 2 inspectors came from the Ministry of Finance. My taxes were all right. And I delayed and delayed their push, and they went away. In fact, they wanted some bribes. They came back a month later, tried again with a strong inspection. I delayed things, I put you in your various methods. They went away. They came a third time. And when he wrote me, he said, "I don't know, they might come a fourth time, and I don't know if they will squeeze me that much that in the end I will pay up. But hooray, I did not know that I can win 3 rounds against this bastard." So this kind of hope, and I mean, I'm sure he would have related that to his friends in a pub, in a tennis club, wherever it is. It's this kind of virus which I try to implement and push and promote.
Max, all I can say is, wow, you have given me so much to think about. On behalf of Michele and myself, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us. And I hope we can continue this conversation.
Thank you very much. Happy to help.
Great to have you, Max.
Thank you. Bye-bye.